Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Peter Hammarstedt, and I am here to be the spoiler alert for Whale Wars Season 5. You now obviously know that at least the Bob Barker makes it back to port. I shouldn't be the one to be here on stage tonight. Captain Paul Watson should be the one to be here. Unfortunately, Captain Paul Watson is under house arrest in Germany for doing the very thing that we support him doing, which is enforcing international conservation law against the poachers of the world. Now, you heard Captain Paul Watson speak, and what's so inspiring to me about Captain Paul Watson is as soon as he was arrested in Germany, I jumped on a plane, I went down to Frankfurt, and I visited him in jail. And as I sat down across from him in this cell that he was being held in, the first thing I asked him is, "Hey Paul, how are you doing? How are the guards treating you? Are you getting enough to eat? You know, how are you feeling?" Captain Paul Watson doesn't even answer my question before asking me, "Hey Peter, how are we doing getting this fourth ship? Are we ready for the next Antarctic campaign?" Myself, Captain Paul Watson's supporters around the world, we've been working 20 hours a day since he was arrested 7 weeks ago. I am fighting tooth and nail for my captain because he's a dear friend of mine. He's been my captain for 10 years, and he is without question the most passionate individual that I know on the issue of protecting our oceans. A story that always comes back to me is 5 years ago, we were down in Antarctica. We've been doing this for 8 years, chasing the Japanese whaling fleet out of the whale sanctuary. And I remember, and you probably all recall, helicopter pilot Chris Altman filming this poor minke whale as she was shot twice, 2 harpoons. She was shot 7 times by a rifle shot, and it took 22 minutes and 30 seconds for her to slowly drown in her own blood. And when this happened, Captain Paul Watson, we were 15 miles away at the time. This was being filmed by the helicopter. We knew that the Yushin Maru number 2 was coming in to transfer this whale onto the factory ship Nishin Maru. And now Captain Paul Watson's been doing this for 40 years. But when he heard the news from helicopter pilot Chris Altman over the radio that, this whale was dying, I looked into his eyes and I saw the perfect combination, the balance of sadness and rage. And what we didn't want was for them to profit off of the suffering of this animal. And so Captain Paul Watson took the Steve Irwin and he placed it right between the Nishin Maru and the Yushin Maru number 2 as they attempted to transfer this sentient being onto this factory ship for processing. And 1,000 tons of steel collided with 1,000 tons of steel, and the Japanese whaling fleet has never dared to whale in the presence of Sea Shepherd again. Now, I'm very glad to be at See No Evil. I came in 2 days ago. I've been sleeping on Captain Paul Watson's couch in Frankfurt. This certainly beats sleeping on his couch. See No Evil is a very unique event. It's a unique event supporting a very unique organization. Sea Shepherd's the only group that actually goes out on the front lines day after day. We're putting our lives and our ships on the line to protect marine wildlife here and now. And I think there are a couple of things that make us unique. First of all, we're not a protest organization. We're a law enforcement organization. We recognize that hanging banners and holding signs and asking people to please, please don't kill the whales, that's not saving life. If you want to save marine wildlife, here and now, you've got to go to the scene of the crime and you've got to put your equipment and your people on the line to save that life here and now. What's great about Sea Shepherd is that we measure our success by the number of lives that we save and the number of criminal operations that we shut down. And since 1977, Sea Shepherd has rammed 10 illegal whaling ships on the high seas, sunk another 10 in port, all without causing an injury. And the lives that have been saved are countless. Just this last year in Antarctica, we were able to save 863 whales from slaughter. That's 863 whales that are swimming freely in the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary because people like Captain Paul Watson, his crew, his volunteers, and supporters like you are willing to say, enough, stop. You go this far and no further. The other thing that I love about Sea Shepherd is that our goal is to protect life, and so we're a non-violent organization, but we call ourselves, or Captain Paul Watson has coined the phrase that we're aggressively non-violent. And so when an illegal whaling vessel gets collided with down in the Southern Ocean, for me, I don't see it any different than when a police car rams a getaway car from the bank robbery. All we're doing is enforcing the law that the governments of the world either lack the political will or the economic means to do anything about these problems. And finally, what I think is very unique about Sea Shepherd is that our clients are not people. Our clients are the whales, the seals, the fish, the sea turtles. That's who we represent. Those are our clients, and we represent them to the best of our abilities. Back in 1986, Sea Shepherd sank half of Iceland's whaling fleet in Reykjavik Harbor, shutting down whaling in Iceland for 19 years. And you can call that a coincidence, or you can call it incredibly effective campaigning. I prefer the latter. But when this action happened, a representative from Greenpeace, John Frizzell, came up to Captain Paul Watson and said, "What you have done is unforgivable, despicable. It has set back the whale conservation movement for decades." And Paul looked at him and said, "Who the hell do you think you are? We didn't sink those ships for you. We didn't sink those ships for Greenpeace. We sunk half of Iceland's whaling fleet for those whales. Find me one single whale that disagrees with what we did in Iceland, and we'll stop." There is a great need in the world today for Sea Shepherd, and the reason for that is the French oceanographer Jacques Cousteau. He said before he died, "The oceans are dying in our time." And for myself and Captain Paul Watson and our crews, who spend most of our time out at sea, we can attest to the diminishment of the oceans. We've seen it. We know that the science is right. There's only between 1 to 10% the amount of fish in the world today that there were 50 years ago. Shark populations in just 30 years have declined by 90%. And even though there's been a moratorium on commercial whaling since 1986, Japan, Iceland, and Norway combined have killed almost 40,000 whales in direct contravention of the law, many of these whales being killed in a Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary. When you've got the law on your side, you've got public opinion on your side, then you're really not left with a lot of other options when these atrocities continue to happen on a daily basis, but to actually go down there and physically shut these guys down because nobody else will. Fortunately for us, we speak the only language that these whalers and these poachers understand. That's the language of profit and loss. And that's why, for us, the Japanese whaling fleet is absolutely in economic ruin. This was the second year we were able to bankrupt them. As Captain Paul Watson says, we go out to sink the Japanese whaling fleet economically. This is the second year that we bankrupted them. The only reason they even went down this year was because of a $30 million subsidy that was taken from the Tsunami Relief Fund. But we were once again able to send the Japanese whaling fleet home early. And because we were able to save over 700 whales, the Japanese whaling fleet was only able to take over 200. They need to take 500 just to break even. We caused them a loss of millions and millions and millions of dollars. And if the Japanese whaling fleet decides to head back down again this year at the end of the year, then God help them, because it will cost them a few tens of millions again. One of the most inspiring campaigns that I've been a part of did not involve ship-to-ship collisions on the high seas. It didn't involve boarding Japanese whaling vessels in the dead of night from jet skis or rubber boats. It didn't involve throwing rotten stink bombs on board the decks of these whaling ships, shutting down their operations. For me, one of the most inspiring actions that I've been involved with in my time with Sea Shepherd was about 5 years ago. There was a whale stranding in Tasmania. There was 54 pilot whales that had stranded on an island called King Island, and Captain Paul Watson asked myself and 4 other crew members to go there to assist the marine mammal rescuers in their efforts. At the end of the day, 53 out of these 54 pilot whales had been reintroduced to the sea. But one of these pilot whales, because of a turn in weather, ended up re-beaching herself. And as the weather turned bad, we started a 3-day rescue effort to get her back to sea to rejoin her pod. She was incredibly dehydrated. I remember spending 24 hours a day by her side. We were keeping her wet so she wouldn't dehydrate. We were measuring her breathing, which was slowing down for every hour that was passing. I could smell from her blowhole that her breath started smelling like curdled milk, which meant that she was getting very dehydrated. But on the 3rd day, there was finally this break in the weather, and we took 2 jet skis and brought a line under her belly, and we pulled her out off the shore and towards the sea. And as we were about 50 meters off the coast, she starts struggling and pulling away from the tow line, and she breaks away from it, and she just swims off in a completely opposite direction. And meanwhile, we're on shore and we're wondering, is she going to re-beach herself? But as the helicopter took up and looked overhead, she could see that her entire pod, the other 53 pilot whales that had survived this stranding, were out there 200 meters off the coast waiting for her. And as she rejoined the pod, they rejoiced and they swam under her and they nudged her, and together as a family group, they left out to sea. And I think about that moment, and I realize that when I stand up on stage, or we say on the show, or whatever it might be, that we saved 863 whales last season, that's 863 times one individual, very much like that pilot whale. And that's why, for me, every one of these lives that we're able to save because of our interventions is a tremendous victory. The reason that I joined Sea Shepherd is because I came to the realization that we have all these laws in place to protect the oceans, but nobody's enforcing them. I mean, we have the law on our side. I came to the realization that in their capacity to suffer, these marine mammals and these animals, they are our equals. I came to the realization that we are not separate from the natural world. We are an integral part of the natural world. And I came to the recognition that throughout history, the only thing that has ever created any social change, any long-lasting real change, has been the actions of individuals like you, like Captain Paul Watson. When I left Frankfurt, I asked Captain Paul Watson, I said, is there a message that you want to get across to the event here at See No Evil? And he said, let everybody know that the oceans don't get the attention they deserve. And as you heard him say on the video, he said, if the oceans die, then we die. And so I see the work that Sea Shepherd does as a legitimate self-defense effort. My home, my backyard is the oceans, and my home on a daily basis is invaded by hunt 'em, kill 'em, armada fleets of ships that see more value in a dead ocean than an ocean that is teeming and flourishing with life. And what's amazing about this movement that you all, by being here, are a part of, is that this is probably the greatest battle in the history of humankind, because this is a battle to save species other than ourselves. But ultimately, by protecting the natural world, we are saving ourselves as well. The situation facing the oceans are critical, but every day I'm filled with hope. And that hope comes from my work with Sea Shepherd. As I've said before, last year we saved 863 whales from slaughter by the Japanese whaling fleet down in Antarctica. By our interventions in the Danish Faroe Islands, these pilot whales that stranded in Australia, thank God they weren't swimming off the Faroe Islands, because if they were caught off the Faroe Islands, they would have been rounded up by a boat, they would have been chased into a shore where a group of boys and men armed with hooks and knives would have slit their throats and turned the bays into crimson red. But by our being in the Faroe Islands this year, for the 2 months we were there, the Faroese did not dare to kill a single pilot whale. And we continue to work in the Galapagos Islands, where we've got this awesome cooperation with the police, the Ecuadorian Environmental Police, and the Galapagos National Park. Where on a daily basis we are seizing shark fins, we are arresting poaching vessels, and we are giving the marine reserve the respect that it deserves, and we're actually creating the reserve, or supporting the reserve. But what fills me with hope tonight is the fact that when I talk about victories, they are our victories. And when I say our victories, I don't just mean Captain Paul Watson's victories or the victories of myself or my crew. I mean, those are victories that we all share. Our ships do not leave port without your support. 90% of the donations that we get go directly into our fuel tanks so we can get our vessels on the front lines and save whales. And the amazing position that you're in by being here tonight is that you, together with the Sea Shepherd ship crew and our onshore volunteers, is you get to be part of the solution rather than be part of the problem. And by helping to support us, by becoming direct action crew members, by signing up as monthly donors, by buying Sea Shepherd merchandise, by auctioning on this beautiful artwork that's here on display, you are able to put fuel in our tanks, and when the numbers come out, we're calling our next campaign in Antarctica Operation Zero Tolerance, because we're going to... because we're going to catch the Japanese whaling fleet earlier than we've ever found them, with 4 ships, not just 3. We're going to send them back home to Japan with a 0-kill quota. And you will think back on this night, and you'll remember that you were part of the solution. And when we put on our website that the Japanese whaling industry is in ruins, that not a single whale was killed this year, then you will feel that that was your victory. So, thank you for being here. Have a great night. And remember that, Captain Paul Watson is he's basically in jail. He's under house arrest because he's dedicated his life to saving whales, seas, and dolphins. Now we've got to be out here to save his life from what would be a death sentence in Costa Rica because of the reach of the Taiwanese shark fin mafia. And so while you're bidding on this beautiful art, while you're becoming Sea Shepherd members, remember to also write to the German Minister of Justice and demand politely that Captain Paul Watson be released, because Captain Paul Watson does not belong in a jail cell in Germany. He doesn't belong in a jail cell in Japan or Costa Rica. He belongs at the helm of one of his ships doing what he does best. And together, we're going to get him back at the helm. So, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Peter Hammarstedt. Give it a big round of applause again, guys.